Welcome to Whatsoever More or Less. My name is Jason, and today I want to talk a little bit about psychology and judicial supremacy. I did look up some terms for this based on some things that kind of bugged me, and also there were some terms that were already in my head uh, that inspired me to kind of keep looking through some more ideas. So I'm just going to put these terms out here first off. Um, the Emperor's New Clothes. So we all know the story of the Emperor who was uh, told, hey, only the most smart people can see that you're wearing these clothes. Everybody else isn't going to see that you're wearing these fine clothes that we're making for you. And the emperor himself didn't want to admit that he wasn't smart enough, so he pretended to see something that wasn't really there. Um, I'm going to go ahead and go to the U.S. Constitution itself. This is the part that's often quoted to support judicial supremacy. It says, this Constitution, this is Article 6, Clause 2, this Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land. And the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. Okay, so what are the judges in the states bound by? Let's see here. The Constitution, the laws of the United States, and that are made in pursuance of it, and the treaties. Now, here's the thing. The Constitution is either originally ratified through the Article 7 process or amendments are ratified through the Article 5 process. If it doesn't go through that process, it's not part of the Constitution. The laws go through the Article 1, Section 7 process. If it doesn't go through that process, it's not a law. Treaties go through the Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2 process. If it doesn't go through that process, it's not a treaty, right? So, nowhere in there is there anything about judicial review or Supreme Court decisions. Technically, uh, federal judges aren't bound by Supreme Court precedent. They just aren't. And to pretend like they are is a bunch of baloney. As a matter of fact, let's read this here. I haven't read this in a while, but let's check this out. The senators and representatives before mentioned, and the members of several state legislatures, and all executive and judicial officers, both of the United States and of the several states, shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution. But no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification in any office or public trust of the United States. They're supposed to support the Constitution. If you take that away from them and say, no, they got to look at judicial review, that's another psychological term we'll get into later on. But the point I'm making is it's the constitutional laws and the treaties. Nothing in there is created by the judicial branch. As a matter of fact, all legislative powers are in the legislative branch. That's just the way it works. So, okay, so the emperor's new clothes. It's always the little kid who finally says, it's not there, dude. Yeah, I'm not buying it, right? It's not there. So, Emperor's New Clothes. Okay, next one. Law professors teaching distinctions without a difference. Okay, what we call a semantic shield, I guess. Um, and I've been getting kind of tired of hearing this one lately. I've been hearing this a few times, like this is the new way they're presenting it or something like that, as though we're going to be dumb enough to buy it. But they say, look, it's not like the actual code book, U.S. code book, gets the law scratched off the law. It's just they stop enforcing it because the Supreme Court says they can't. Or they say, look, it's not like we're technically amending the Constitution. It's just a new interpretation of the Constitution. Well, we all speak English too. We don't need somebody interpreting the Constitution for us, bro. So the end result is everybody treats it as though the Constitution has been amended, right? It's a distinction without a difference. The end result is everybody treats it as though that law got scratched off the books, right? It's a distinction without a difference, and it's not allowed. It's become a tradition. Everybody's like doing it, right? Okay, so let's get okay. A couple more. I'm looking forward to this Elder Uchtdorf term that he brought up recently. Well, let's move on to the next one here. So far we got Emperor's New Clothes effect. Okay, then we've got distinctions without a difference, or the semantic shield, right? And then giving an inch to take a mile. Okay, so this is originally it was John Marshall that did this. He said, "Yeah, no, the Constitution doesn't allow for what is it, writs of mandamus or something like that from the Supreme Court to the president." So, but it is our job to tell everybody else what the law is. It's nowhere in Article 3. Okay, that is not in Article 3 for the Supreme Court to tell everybody else what the law is. Okay, it's just not there. But what he did, he said, yeah, we're going to say that we don't have this power to issue writs of mandamus, I think is what it was. Okay, once again, I don't try to study Supreme Court precedent too much because I feel like it makes you stupider regarding the actual Constitution if you're not careful. Just saying, okay? No offense, but honestly, dudes, you got to study the Constitution itself. So anyhow, he turns that down and says, "But we are the ones to tell everybody else what the Constitution is, or we are the ones to tell everybody else what the law is." So he gave an inch and took a mile. He says, "Yeah, I'm going to grab this power for me." Because he gave the inch, is he entitled to the mile? I don't see where that's in the Constitution. So that's another weird psychological effect. People call it the ingenious move. I don't call it ingenious at all. Everybody's got an oath of office to like review the constitutionality of stuff that they're being told to do. Yes, that's like almost implied with taking an oath. All right, moving on here. Rules for thee, for me, but not for thee. Okay, so the 10th Amendment says powers not reserved to the federal government nor prohibited to the states, reserved to the states. The power to interpret the Constitution for everybody else isn't reserved to the federal government. It's not prohibited to the states. So guess what? It's right there. They are told it's either reserved to the states or the people, right? Right there, they are told. If it's not written in, you don't have it. Okay? And so it's rules. They're being told not to take it, but they're taking it anyhow, but then telling us to follow their rulings. And if we don't follow their rulings, they treat us as though we violated the Constitution, even though what we might be doing is actually more consistent with the actual Constitution. So that's rules for me, but not for thee. Okay? Dunning-Kruger, this is the one from Elder Uchtdorf that I recently reviewed again. This is where people oftentimes that are incredibly incompetent at something, when surveyed, express that they're positive they're super competent at it, right? And so Supreme Court rulings often are very split decisions. So that means you've got, say, for example, 6-3 or 5-4. What if it was the 3 who actually got it right, who actually told us the truth about what the Constitution says, and everybody else was kind of, just wrong, incompetent, not good at what they were doing, and yet we follow. We make it permanent binding on everybody else throughout all the country, all these other expert lawyers at all these other courts and all these, because surely these, 6-3, right? So it's deference to the illusory truth or manufactured competence is what we'd call that, right? Doesn't necessarily mean they got it right what the Constitution says at all. So relying on that's a terrible idea. Milgram experiment. Milgram experiment is the one where the guy in the lab coat pretends to be an expert, and another guy is pretending to get shocked on the other side. And the only one who doesn't know what's going on is the one being told to push buttons, add more shocks for each time somebody gets a question wrong. And when the person on the other side pretends like they're getting hurt really bad by the shocks, they say, "Stop, stop," right? And the guy in the lab coat says, "No, just trust me, keep going, keep going. I know it seems like it's wrong, but they agreed to it, and I'm an expert. I know what we're doing," right? And the person keeps shocking and keeps shocking, right? Milgram experiment, right? Let's go ahead and let the experts in the robes, right, the lab coats, tell us what's up. Diffusion of responsibility. There's probably a ton of people out there in the government that know it's wrong, but they're all waiting for somebody else to do something about it. That's diffusion of responsibility. It's like when somebody's getting beat up in the alley in New York City, and there's 30 people standing around waiting for any one of the other people to do something about it. That's diffusion of responsibility. There's tons of people that know that judicial review isn't a real power. It's not a binding power on the rest of us. Winner take all in factions. This is when President Oaks pointed out that when you do these winner take all type cases where you want the Supreme Court to decide who wins, who got it right, ultimately you just leave one side really ticked off, and that's all. It's President Oaks said the Supreme Court's ill-suited to the legislative lawmaking process. Okay, and they are. He's also said we don't find inspiration in all their decisions interpreting the Constitution. So in other words, we say our Constitution is divinely inspired, but he came right out at the same time says, I don't find inspiration in the Supreme Court decisions. Let's have that clarification. The Constitution is inspired. Supreme Court rulings, no. Okay, moving on. Strategic institutional maintenance, manipulative, telling them what they want to hear. I've seen this before in people I've been around that blew my mind when they said, "Nah, dude, we're just saying what they know, what we know they want to hear from us." I could not believe the lack of authenticity from these guys. There are people that are really like that. And so at times when people start getting tired of the Supreme Court, there's probably a real chance that some of them are going to go along with making a ruling that gives everybody just like a little tease, that kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back type of thing, right? Okay, outsourced authority and fake surrender to get more authority. This is what I thought of when I was thinking about Congress, how I bet they probably like letting judicial review keep happening, because technically there's hardly any powers that the Constitution grants to Congress. But if you can get the Supreme Court to review stuff, shut things down on occasion, but then say, when most things are challenged, to come up with some explanation for, well, really you can replace necessary and proper with this or that, or you could, the Chevron deference, all that kind of stuff. All of a sudden, you add legitimacy by way of your explanation of why you're not going to strike something down, that then is used again and again and again. Okay, epistemic knowledge dependence. Okay, that's what we're dealing with right now. That's where people don't even want to try to know the Constitution for themselves. They think they got to look and see what the Supreme Court has said. Vicarious interpretation or constitutional proxyism. This is more related to the oath of office. The implication, if somebody takes an oath of office to the Constitution, is they're going to study the Constitution for themselves, and then constantly be reviewing the Constitution in their brains and be able to recognize when they're being told to do something unconstitutional. But instead, we've decided to have this vicarious interpretation or this constitutional proxyism. Okay. Another one, loss of legitimacy. Okay, let me think about that one real quick. That's the loss of legitimacy of the Constitution. That's why I wrote that one in. So basically, when you've gone for years and years and years without following the actual Constitution, at some point people begin to think the Constitution isn't really the Constitution anymore. And so the Constitution itself loses legitimacy. One of the most frustrating people I recently heard, I want to pick on him, but he said, you're not going to save the Constitution. That's not true. You cannot say that. Wilford Woodruff said that even if it's not saved in the entire nation of the United States, that it'll be saved in places. President Benson hinted at something similar. John Taylor hinted at something similar. So I'm going to go with what they said versus these other discouraging people. Okay? The king can do no wrong. The despotism of an oligarchy, as Thomas Jefferson called it, where no matter what the Supreme Court says, even if it blatantly is the opposite of what the Constitution says, we treat it as though, okay, they got it right. Okay, that's the king can do no wrong. Interpretive captivity. Let's think here. Interpretive captivity. I can't remember this one, but I'm going to compare it to what's going on in law schools nowadays, because I'm pretty sure that's the truth, is that in the law schools, if you're taking what they call a constitutional law class, 75 to 90% of what they're teaching you is actually Supreme Court precedent. It's not the Constitution at all. Virtue signaling the Constitution. People who say, we got to defend our Constitution, we got to stand by it, but they're not actually studying it, and they're only like hitting the key main talking points that are popular with everybody. And if you ask them what the details are in Article 5 or Article 6 or Article 4 or this or that, they couldn't quote it to you. They couldn't tell you. That's virtue signaling the Constitution. Okay, so there's some psychology terms. Emperor's New Clothes, law professors, distinctions without a difference, giving an inch to take a mile, rules for me but not for thee, Dunning-Kruger, incompetence, right? Milgram experiment, diffusion of responsibility, winner-take-all in factions, strategic institutional maintenance or manipulation, telling them what they want to hear occasionally, right? 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I compared it to outsourced authority, fake surrender to get more authority, epistemic knowledge, dependence or epistemic dependence, vicarious interpretation, constitutional proxyism, loss of legitimacy, the king can do no wrong, despotism of an oligarchy, interpretive captivity, virtue signaling the Constitution. Hopefully these ideas make sense. Look into them. See if you can think of others on your own. Once again, I just read Article 6, Clause 2 to you. It's just not there. Even down to the other judges themselves, they don't have to be reliant on the things that the Supreme Court has decided in the past. The Constitution does not hold them to that at all. Okay. Some little thoughts here I had. Elder Peter M. Johnson gave a list of Satan's tactics a few years back. It says deception, distraction, discouragement. And here's my questions. Are you deceived about how the Constitution is supposed to work according to the plain meaning of the agreement? Maybe. Are you distracted from studying the actual Constitution because you feel like it's more important to know than stare decisis, or because you feel it's more important to know stare decisis, or another Supreme Court precedent? Study the actual Constitution. It's better. Are you discouraged to study it at all because by the time you add all the landmark rulings, you have amassed far more than what President Benson called the limited proper role of government? Okay, So that's deception, distraction, discouragement. Elder Clark, I just found a list from him today that he got when he was reading First Nephi. It says, maybe it was Second Nephi. Anger, pacification, and moral relativism. Are you a person who sees everything as a conspiracy? Are you angry that government exists at all? That might be an anger problem, right? Are you so comfortable that you think that you have better things to do with your time? That might be pacification. Do you lack confidence to discern the truth for yourself? That might be moral relativism. Okay, Ezra Taft Benson said, this is in Jesus Christ Gifts and Expectations. How are they going to know what the Constitution is, so they will know when it is on the brink of ruin? In many of the law schools today, you will hear that the Constitution is whatever the Supreme Court says it is. Could it be that the Supreme Court, which President McKay said is leading the nation down the road of atheism, is the agency to tell us what this divine document is? But President McKay had a better approach when he encouraged us to support good and conscientious candidates who are truly dedicated to the Constitution in the tradition of the founders. They are the ones the Lord referred to as wise men. It is to them, the Lord and his prophets, that we should go to determine what the Constitution is. There must have been a tradition of our founding fathers, or President McKay would not have referred to it. To the Lord, his prophets, and the founding fathers, we must go to learn this divine document so that our efforts will be to preserve and not destroy the Constitution. Okay, so the tradition of the founders and the words of the prophets. And I've got one more President Kimball quote here from this book, Teachings of President Kimball. It says, the sad part is that a lot of us take our civil rights for granted. We were born in a free country. We think freedom could never end, but it could. It is ending today in many countries. We could lose it too. The only way we can keep our freedom is to work at it. Not some of us, all of us. Not some of the time, but all the time. So if you value your citizenship and want to keep it for yourself and your children and their children, give it your faith, your belief, and give it your active support in civic affairs. And this is on page 405 of this book, okay, where he's talking about the Constitution and other stuff, Declaration of Independence, but I wanted to read that part. So we're supposed to study the Constitution for ourselves. We should not let the stare decisis, the whole collection of rulings, intimidate us to study the Constitution for ourselves. They were given no authority whatsoever to be the binding meaning of the Constitution, and many of our founders rejected that whole idea. It never made it into the actual document. That's the problem with originalism, is that if you say, well, this guy talked about it and this guy talked about it, it's besides the point. Did it make it into the document? Oh yeah, no, it didn't. So it's not there. Okay. So there's messed up psychology about it. If you felt some messed up psychology about it, I wanted to point out you're not alone. Ignore it. Keep studying the Constitution for yourself. That's what I finally did. All right. Thanks for listening, you guys.